There's a console whose failure I was really sad to witness. That's the failure of the PS Vita. I'm amused by how many videos are coming out now about how awesome the Vita is, what games it has, and how many people like it more than the Switch. I experienced all of this back in 2012. I got my Vita almost at launch and I was absolutely happy. This was a true PSP too, with 2 analog sticks, an OLED screen, and games of unprecedented quality. Just Uncharted alone was worth it. This was a portable PS3 in your hands, but it didn't take off. Despite great hardware and a good launch lineup, because of the popularity of mobile games, people skipped the console, and after a couple of years, Sony gave up on its development. They finally stopped releasing it in the West and sold it mainly in Japan, and there the console was at least somewhat loved. But there's something even worse than the Vita: PlayStation TV. For some unknown reason, Sony took the PlayStation Vita, stuffed its guts into a small box with an HDMI output, and got a PS Vita for TV where, in theory, you could play Vita games and also use it for game streaming. But in reality, we got a half-baked PlayStation with a bunch of problems. So let's try to figure out why the hell Sony released this thing and called it PlayStation TV. Let's go. To feel the absurdity of this thing, I suggest starting with the unboxing. A small box the size of a deck of playing cards with a bunch of small ports. There's a slot for Vita cards, a slot for proprietary memory cards, HDMI, LAN, USB, and a power connector that, like the charger, unexpectedly came from the PSP. Apparently they decided to save money and take the port from the PSP so they wouldn't have to make anything unique. And that's it. If you were expecting to find a controller in the box with a console, you were wrong. There isn't one. Presumably, it was assumed that you'd be buying the PS TV in addition to your PlayStation and already have a controller, and this addition consisted of one good feature. Here's what the PS Vita did excellently: stream games from PS4. You could play your console on it like a Wii U gamepad, and since the PS TV was basically a PS Vita, it also had PS4 streaming functionality, just not a console in your hands, but for example, to a TV in the next room. And that would be fine, but the PS TV cost $100, and paying $100 just for the ability to stream video from PS4, that's kind of underwhelming. There should be something else. But it all came down to the fact that the Vita is too specific of a console to turn into a home one, and Sony didn't try very hard. It all starts with the menu. The Vita's menu is designed for a touchscreen, and what did they do? They slapped on control of this menu using analog sticks. Inconvenient, but without extra costs. And for example, when closing apps that on the Vita fold up with your finger like little pages, here you need to hold a button and watch an emulation of this folding. Such a crippled interface, and it's completely unclear how to press the top button. You managed to do it by miracle after about 10 tries. And that's a shame. I always liked the Vita's menu. It's so three-dimensional and progressive. By the way, very similar to iOS. But here, all the conveniences of this menu were killed by gamepad control, and it's also blurry because it renders at the Vita's native resolution, which is sub HD. In short, the menu already makes it clear what kind of console we're dealing with. Okay, the next thing they promised us: Vita games on the big screen. We take the Killzone cartridge, insert into the slot, and it seems not too bad. PS3 level graphics look pretty good until the first call to action. You see, the Vita's launch lineup heavily utilized all the console's incredible features, so you often need to swipe the screen, tilt the console, or even use the rear touchpad. And now the question: how do you implement this on PS TV? Well, the console supports 2 controllers, DualShock 3, and over time, it started supporting DualShock 4. And on the latter, the touchpad emulates the touchscreen, so you move it across roughly like on a touchscreen. And it seems like here's the solution to the touchscreen, but the implementation, for example, weapon switching with a side touch button. Yes, you can get used to it and press the right area of the gamepad's panel, and it will emulate pressing the button, but it doesn't always work. For this to work, you need a very precise and short tap. If you press it for too long, the console will think you're dragging your finger across the screen, and the weapon won't switch. And when cutscenes start and the famous screen swipe, here it's completely 50-50 whether you'll pass or lose. Or here's the funniest part: at the beginning of the game, you need to put your finger on screen like it's being scanned. On PS TV, we pretend to press it using a cursor, and all the magic disappears. And it turns out that Killzone has decent graphics and the shooter part plays well, but these damn crutches with touchscreen imitation, like on $3 AliExpress consoles. This is clearly not Sony's level, and that's still with DualShock 4. On DualShock 3, you'd have to navigate the screen with analog sticks. I won't even explain how bad that is. It's bad, but it's not even rock bottom. At least Killzone lets us play, but if we even try to launch Little Big Planet, the game will tell us it's not even supported on PlayStation TV. And this is Sony's stunning incompetence. They're like, yeah, we'll make a home PS Vita, Some games will work poorly, and some just won't work at all. Yes, the console has a whole list of games that are officially not supported, and these aren't some random titles. Among them is Uncharted. Arguably, the main game on Vita isn't supported on PS TV. Besides Uncharted, there's Wipeout 2048, Metal Gear Solid Collection, Mortal Kombat, Rayman Legends. Basically, all the top Vita games just didn't work on PS TV. And that's not all. Here's the most piquant story. PlayStation TV could supposedly be classified as a TV box. Well, it didn't have Netflix. Big tragedy, you'll say. But Netflix was specifically on PlayStation Vita. But Netflix officially refused to support PlayStation TV. So this is a TV box that didn't even have TV streaming. Brilliant, Sony. Absolute 10 out of 10. On top of everything, there were no AR games that on Vita were played with the cameras and cards. Not a big loss, but another limitation. You might ask who they even made PS TV for, but I doubt Sony themselves even know the answer. If Wikipedia is to be believed, they were counting on success in China. Game consoles are officially banned there, but this is a TV box, not a console. But I found no news of PS TV success in China. It was somewhat more relevant for PS4 owners and allowed playing a limited library of PSP and PS1 games. You could say it was the world's first retro console, but there was another idea, PS Now. Sony launched the cloud gaming service back in 2014, meaning you played games in the cloud and PS TV supported it. So the concept was futuristic. You bought a small box and could play full AAA games from PlayStation 4 on it. And coupled with a reduced price to 60 euros or 65 US dollars, this boosted sales, but didn't help much. And after a year, the console was discontinued. You could say it was a failure, but a small one, since it's literally a PS Vita clone, and Sony probably didn't lose much money. But then, an event occurred that forever changed the retro community and the fate of the entire planet. Or at least the fate of the Vita and PS TV. I'm talking about the hack. When it came out, attitudes toward the consoles immediately changed. The hack on them is amazing, very easy, fast, convenient, and still works. Let's call it an alternative app store where without any hassle, you could download Vita games, PSP titles, and even PS1 games. You just press the download button and get your games on the console. Plus, thanks to the firmware, unofficial GTA ports appeared. But if the hack gave PlayStation Vita a second life, it basically gave PSTV life itself. Because the first thing they did with it after the hack was hack the whitelist of games, which officially made it possible to run all unsupported games, like Uncharted for example. Of course, due to porting the game from 5 to 50 inches, there are graphical issues in the game, but overall, it's more than playable. Problems arise when you try to use all 150 features of the PS Vita. For example, balancing with the gyroscope when walking across the log, and the DualShock 4 has this gyroscope, but here, it's not supported, so Drake just falls. Fortunately, the second time you can get through it without any problems, so the game is generally completable, and various things like touch zoom on a rifle are hard to use. The menu is controlled only by gestures, which isn't very convenient, but the worst part is climbing vines. You need to do this using the rear touchpad, and its emulation happens on the analog sticks. You need to press them and somehow imitate sliding on the rear touchpad. It's horrible, but all of these features could have been disabled with a simple patch, and we would have gotten a working Uncharted port on PlayStation TV. Alas, Sony was too lazy. Or like, why Wipeout wasn't officially supported? I don't understand at all. The game only uses the touchscreen a little bit, and that's it. The game plays perfectly on PlayStation TV. One question remains, why play mobile games on a big screen? After all, on 5 inches in 2012, this looked like magic. The same Need for Speed Most Wanted released in full version. Simply a miracle on Vita's ancient hardware. But on PS TV, all this gets smeared to mush, because the game runs not at native, but at even lower resolution. And this looks, to put it mildly, sketchy. For example, the headlight glow consists of such big pixels as if it's Minecraft. Things are better with simple games like Hotline Miami. Playing them on the big screen is pure bliss. On the other hand, where does Hotline Miami play poorly? In short, the hack makes PS TV at least somewhat interesting, giving at minimum access to the full game library. And by the way, you can now even run Netflix. But the most interesting thing is emulation. PS Vita officially supported PSP and PS1 games, but the hack made everything cooler because you can install the Adrenaline emulator and get into the good old familiar menu. Yeah, this is the ability to turn your TV into a giant PSP. Of course, the first thing I downloaded was Vice City, and playing the good old familiar GTA on a huge screen with DualShock in hand. There's something to that. The graphics, of course, are absolutely terrible. They were meant for a small 2005 screen, and here, we're stretching them onto a giant 4K TV. And you should ask yourself, yes, the experience is kind of nostalgic, but you can't play this for long. We've already subconsciously gotten used to good graphics, and what amazed us before now causes some confusion. How did we play this? So it's worth thinking, should you replay these old games, or leave them in the archives of memory as something incredibly cool? Although Loco Roco plays better than GTA because there's no complex 3D there, the only question remains with resolution. The emulator emulator can't upscale games, apparently due to the console's power, and they look pixelated. In the settings, there are only different types of filtering, but I prefer the original or the reduced original. All these blurry stripe filters are very much an acquired taste. Best of all, unexpectedly, is PS1 emulation, which happens inside PSP emulation. So we run a PSP emulator to run a PS1 emulator inside it. That's double emulation for you. And playing all these PS1 games, considering you can easily download them from the unofficial store, that's good. You sit on your couch, play with a new controller. All of this without old consoles, adapters, or inverters. You just pick up a DualShock and play what you're used to. So generally speaking, PS TV isn't such a bad thing. The ability to connect a small box to your TV and get practically native games from 3 consoles at once on a good controller, that's awesome, if not for the price. Honestly, I'm tired myself of every episode being whining about how much this thing costs now, and how it's undeserved. But the prices never stop surprising me. If PS TV costs a few bucks or at least the recommended 60 euros, that would be great. But $150 for a decade-old something without a controller just because it runs old games, that's insane. Retro gaming and retro fetishism in general has reached its peak. People are buying up old consoles and seem to not understand why themselves. There are tons of more interesting things in the world than old games, and I'm curious where people find time for them. If you routinely play through old games, really old ones, not Stalker 1 but something earlier, then write in the comments what you play and why. It'll be interesting to read because I haven't met such people. Coming back to the Vita, I feel really sorry for it because of how much it was ahead of its time. Recently, the Switch 2 came out and has an IPS screen, while this Marvel from 2012 has OLED. And now, everyone's hyping up VR, AR, various Vision Pros are coming out. But Vita had AR games back then, and they played quite nicely. Vita was a console from the future, no doubt. It was simply ahead of its time. But alas, Sony quickly gave up on it and I think focused on the PS4 launch. And they did the right thing. The console turned out great. But I'm very happy about the news that Sony apparently decided to make a new handheld. Yes, it would seem the market is already divided. There's Steam Deck, Switch 2, but I doubt Sony won't have something unique and interesting. They know how to make handhelds. I have 2 hopes: that it won't have such a boring design, and a PS5. The console is great, but really, I've never held anything more boring in my life. And that it won't be like the new Xbox or ROG Ally or PS Portal. I want handheld consoles to remain handheld, not take up all the space in your backpack.